I'm Roy Lee Lindsay with the North Carolina Pork Council, and I want everyone to remember, bacon makes everything better.
Everybody, welcome back to the David Glenn Show, now seen and heard exclusively here on the North Carolina Sports Network. Our next guest was a three-sport athlete while growing up in Miami, a city that later had his own father, also named Manny Diaz, as its mayor for 8 years. Our guest, Coach Manny Diaz, went to college at Florida State, which is also where he began his coaching career during the peak of the Bobby Bowden era in Tallahassee. In the early 2000s, Coach also spent 6 seasons on Chuck Amato's staff at NC State right here in our backyard, and we got to know him even better when he was the head coach of the Miami Hurricanes for 3 seasons. Over the last 2 years, he was an outstanding defensive coordinator for Penn State, where he was a semifinalist for the Broyles Award, which is given to the #1 assistant coach in America each year. Coach Diaz was hired, of course, last December to take over the Duke program after Coach Elko left for Texas A&M. And Coach and the Devils are off to an excellent start so far this season. Manny Diaz, welcome back to the David Glenn Show. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me. Very, very kind introduction.
I appreciate you being here. I know you were officially born in Miami, Coach, as I mentioned, but is it fair to say in a weird way that you were sort of born as a football coach in the city of Tallahassee? Because you were there at one of the greatest times for any program in the history of college football.
That's absolutely true. How fortunate was I? I mean, to walk the hallways with Bobby Bowden. I was on the staff for 3 seasons. We lost 3 games in 3 years. One was actually at Carter Finley Stadium, huge upset. We played for 2 national championships and we won 1. And I thought, hey, this coaching stuff is easy, you know. And so now I've been spending the rest of my career trying to get back to that level.
When you were an undergrad at Florida State, was there already a seed in you that I want to be a football coach? Because you become the grad assistant. You mentioned Coach Bowden. Yeah, Chuck Amato. You had Mark Richt for part of that time. Mickey Andrews. I mean, these were like the legends of my childhood and maybe yours. When did that sprout, basically, the coaching vibe?
You know, it was always in there. I just didn't know how to be a coach, right? And so I was on a different path. So like, you know, you mentioned, I think even as a kid growing up, I was always, you know, I always try to think, you know, what coaches were thinking. And even when I was playing in high school, you know, I'd ask coaches all kinds of questions and try to understand the game. Just, you know, I just didn't think it was for me. And, you know, lo and behold, kind of sort of, you know, snuck in through the back door into this profession.
Given that uncommon background I mentioned of your dad as the longtime mayor of Miami, what would you summarize as the most important things you learned from him, either as a leader or just more generally in life? Because obviously being a mayor and being a head football coach are very different jobs, but they both involve a lot of leadership.
There's a lot of same as. Actually, it was interesting. I was at NC State when he got elected. So people always assume that I grew up in a political house. He had never held an office until then. But in the 8 years that he did, when I was at NC State and then at Middle Tennessee, it was a great sounding board because there are a lot of similarities in the people that you lead, that you have to set the vision. You're not always judged, you know, correctly or fairly, and that's okay. You have to be able to stand up to public scrutiny and do what you believe is right. And ultimately, you are responsible for a great number of people, and not everything that they do you've got to trust the people that work underneath you. So we had great conversations about what it takes to be a leader, and it was great to see in real time.
During those 6 years as an assistant at NC State, and also those 3 years that you were the head coach at Miami, Duke was not very good at the time in the sport of football. I actually looked it up. The Devils even went 0-8 in conference play multiple times when you and your family were right down the road in Raleigh. What do you remember about your perception of Duke football back then? And then fast forward, obviously you had to have a much more desirable perception last December when you got the call about the Duke job.
Well, yeah, to your point, what I remember is that the difference when David Cutcliffe came through here, right? And by the time I got back to the ACC at Miami in 2016, Cut had already won the Coastal, which Miami had never done. And even beat us down in Miami in 2018. So you saw what this place could be. I think COVID had a very, a vast amount of unintended consequences on college football, affected every program differently. And then going from afar, being at Penn State the last couple of years and seeing the success that was here, I think a big part of it, I believe this in all college athletics. I believe alignment wins. And I believe the universities that from top to bottom, from president to athletics director to head coach to everybody, the ones that are aligned and want to be successful in football, generally speaking, are. And the ones that are not, that somewhere in there, there's some misalignment. Usually they're not, or they're not to the point they wish they were. And what I was very encouraged about was that Duke is all in on football, and Duke wants to be great at football. Duke, Duke's the standard of Duke in every other program here and every academic program is excellence. And the way it was explained to me is that Duke has decided that football should be held to the same standard as their outstanding men's basketball program, the same standard as the business school, the same standard as the School of Public Policy. If it's got these 4 letters written on it, it should be excellent.
Michael Berard, Managing Director Investments with the Founders Group at Stifel, works with a select group of high net worth individuals and institutions to develop and implement investment plans tailored to their specific objectives and risk tolerances. If you are interested in highly personalized, well-researched guidance and outstanding personal service, you can contact Michael at 984-364-2002. That's 984-364-2002. Stifel Nicholas & Company Incorporated, member SIPC and NYSE. The original Saltworks has become a legendary breakfast, brunch, and lunch place in Wilmington for both locals and out-of-town visitors over the last 50-plus years. Our good friend Bob Hubbard owns the place, but he's also the one cooking your food and often roaming the dining room to greet you with a smile and to make sure your visit is a great one. Bob has been running the show at this unique roadside diner for more than 20 years now, and he and his friendly, hardworking staff aim to treat you like one of their own. Try Bob's homemade omelets or special recipe grits for breakfast or his legendary cheeseburgers for lunch. The original Saltworks, your breakfast and lunch choice on Oleander Drive in Wilmington. Manny Diaz is joining us here on the David Glenn Show. You mentioned those standards of excellence. I saw that you were a guest on Coach K's radio show, maybe right around the time you were hired at Duke. I actually asked you the question in Charlotte at ACC Kickoff about the importance of your strength coach, and you shared like he was one of the first phone calls. Was Coach K somebody you either leaned on for advice about the Duke culture or in any other way? And how has that relationship, I know you're busy coaching football, but how has that proceeded? Because right down the hall somewhere is one of the greatest basketball coaches in the history of the world.
Yeah, that was a pinch me moment, right? To sit there and do the podcast with him. And I mean, my earliest memories of Duke are in the mid 80s in Miami. I remember Duke with Danny Ferry came down and played the Hurricanes at basketball. I think he scored like 56 points or something like that. So, I'm a big believer. I love those revered coaches. Again, growing up in Miami with Don Shula was head coach of the Dolphins from before I was born until I think after I was done with college, and when it just meant to be coach, right? And when the coaches really, embody the school, embody the values of the school, and so you can't help but learn, what Duke is, and it's been a great education for me since I've been here, from Coach K and everybody else that's tied to this place. The people what I've learned is this: people who are attached to Duke have enormous pride in this institution, its university, the community, and what it's done for them.
Since you mentioned Coach Cut earlier, quick story. In 25 years of the David Glenn Show, there's only a few people I've ever had as a weekly guest, and Coach Cut was one of them. So I got to know him fairly well. He always spoke highly of you, and I've been told that you guys have maintained a friendship, which is a little unusual. He wasn't your immediate predecessor at Duke, obviously, but you guys have stood in the same shoes. Tell me the nature of that relationship? Because I imagine that's one more sort of phone call you can make, or maybe somebody that you've gotten advice from because he truly stood in those shoes as Duke's head coach for a long time.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, to think that you're going to know it all and come in and have something figured out, you have to learn the place, because every job in college football is different. And so Coach Cut is a guy that I really got to know well, ironically, during COVID, because there was so much chaos and the world was changing so fast. In the ACC, we would meet every week as a head coaches, on Zoom. And I mean, if there should be a commissioner in college football, it should be David Cutcliffe. I mean, just his wisdom and his understanding and his ability to think just beyond what's good for him or his university and understand what's great for the betterment of the game, in my mind, is unmatched. So I think we had forged, a little bit of a relationship and certainly respect on those calls. And then, as you mentioned, when I got here, wanted him to be a part of the program. We've had some great conversations. I had him speak to our coaching staff before we started training camp. Let him just tell whatever he had on his mind. We had some great Q&A, some great feedback. So I'm really excited about him continuing to be able to influence our program.
It must have been pretty wild of you to grow up in Miami and then to earn your way into the position of the head coach of the Hurricanes. Obviously, people can forget you had 2 winning seasons out of your 3 years there before heading to Penn State. Is there anything, Coach, that you now know as a head coach, even though every job is different, that you wish you knew in 2019 when you took over a program that was, a 5-time national champion back when I was growing up?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, you could ask anybody who's been a head football coach in college football, and I'm sure in every other sport. You have no idea what it's like until you do it. There's just nothing that can prepare you for it. It's not like being a coordinator. It's not like anything. And so just the education in 2019 of how to run a program, everything. I mean, you can't help but just learn. I mean, you're constantly taught and learn some hard lessons, that first year. We finished 6-6 and then lost the bowl. But I do feel like the next year was COVID. And we put together a great team that year. I really liked the team that we had there. And then we had some, major injuries in September in the third year. But to be able to come back and win 5 out of 6 games, I think we won 12 ACC games the last 2 years there. So I still felt like we had things trending in the right direction. But ultimately, we made too many mistakes, and that's part of it. And you accept the accountability for that. But you're always learning. No different than you tell the players, right? You want them to learn from their performances. We all do the same thing as coaches, assistant coaches or head coaches. So it was a great learning experience. I'm thankful for every day that I had there. But all of that, and now has made me a better defense coordinator at Penn State, and it's certainly made me a better head coach now here at Duke.
One goofy question for you, and then we'll keep your day rolling. We live in a social media-driven world to a degree, and it just turns out that there's a coach, Manny Diaz, who's like an 8-time national champion tennis coach at the University of Georgia. So I am smart enough to figure out that I follow you at Coach_Manny Diaz, but probably everybody's first guess at Coach Manny Diaz happens to be somebody else. So I'm just curious, have you guys ever met? Have you ever conversed? Have you ever had headaches related to that? Or is it just no big deal?
I'm sure he has. I should send him like a bouquet of flowers once a year because all the hatred DMs and that go his way, he doesn't deserve it. He's certainly the best Manny Diaz coach in this country. And like I said, if you're out there listening, Manny, I'm sorry for what you've had to endure.
Last thing, Coach, you are off to a good start. Has your team surprised you as you try to have maybe a bowl season in your first year with the Blue Devils?
I don't know if surprise the right word, but it's been fun to watch them maybe confirm some things that you would, thought or hoped that you would see. Certainly proud of the way that we were able to start, but still a long way to go. And we just kind of try to stay where our feet are and worry what we have right in front of us, because that's enough for us.
Thanks for squeezing us in today and working through some technical difficulties, Coach. We look forward to future visits and getting to know you a little bit better, too.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
You got it. Manny Diaz, Duke football coach in year 1 with the Blue Devils. Thanks for being with us today across North Carolina. We appreciate your visits here on the North Carolina Sports Network.